All right, I'm ready. You guys ready?
Yeah.
Okay. Here we go in 5, 4, 3. Let's do it.
Yo, welcome to the Bub and Bob Show, where we talk about faith, culture, all kinds of other things from a Christian worldview. I am Bub Coons. Over there somewhere is Bob Matossian making this whole thing happen. Say hello.
Hey, how you doing?
There he is. Hope that camera's working, but we got him. Hey, my guest today, this guy is a great guy. I call him actually one of the 4 horsemen of the apologetic movement, whatever that means. It's very, very important to realize that. He is the president and founder of Stand to Reason. He has been a great inspiration to me and countless other people. He's written a couple of books that I want to talk about, The Story of Reality and Tactics. Incredible books. You should get them. This is the wonderfully wise and wildly winsome Greg Koukl. Welcome to the Bub and Bob Show.
Bob, nice to see you.
Yeah.
I'm glad we finally connected.
Yes.
I guess we actually met a few years back.
We met at an event at TBN.
Was it something to do with evolution?
It was evolution, exactly what it was.
I do remember that.
And you and Carl Kirby were there, and I was like, Carl lives in Kentucky, and he was staying at my house, and I'm like, I'll go with you.
Right.
Because it's right down the street from where I live.
Sure.
Up the street, whatever it is.
Yeah,
but,
that was a long time ago.
That was a long time ago.
Yeah, we're both a bit grayer since then, I think.
We're a little bit grayer and a little bit, we got the little wrinkles up there. Yeah. But you were great on that show. I remember, and I had.
Thank you.
So many people were around you talking to both you and Carl that I didn't actually get a chance to go, hey.
Well, now we've got our chance,
This
don't
is
we?
fantastic. Yeah, one of the things I like to do is we really want the world to see how God can transform a life. And then when he transforms a life, what a person can do with that if he's obedient, right? And so I would like to go back to your past and, how did you grow up? How many kids were in your family? What was your mom and dad like? I mean, did you always have this kind of brain, or did it just...
Well, I've always had the brain, the contents of the brain a bit different. Or the contents of the mind, to be more precise. But I had a very unique experience in one way. I grew up in the 50s and the 60s. Most of the people we traffic with nowadays are a result of what happened specifically in the 60s. But I was one who grew up in that more stable period of the 50s, at more bourgeois period, which actually had a lot of good things about it, and benefited from those things, and they brought stability to my life. But then when I was a teenager in the mid-60s, and the Vietnam War, death of John Kennedy, I was 13 years old when he was killed, and then the Vietnam War started soon after, then the Beatles invaded, and then Transcendental Meditation came in, and there were all kinds of things happening. Right. So I was raised in a family, 5 siblings.
Wow.
My first 4 years were on a farm in northern Wisconsin.
Nice.
And then my dad he wanted to be a potato farmer. I don't know if he actually ever farmed potatoes, but he worked in a fertilizer factory for a few years while he was trying to get up to speed. And then on Good Friday, 1955, when I was not quite 5 years old, the whole farmhouse burned right to the ground. It was a clapboard farmhouse. There was a chip in the chimney or something.
Wow.
There were 4 kids at that time, and the place, I remember it quite clearly. Escaping from the house, the only thing that we saved was my mom grabbed the Easter ham.
Okay.
Because we were poor, and we didn't have anything like that on a regular basis. So she grabbed the ham.
That is
all
crazy.
their wedding pictures went up in smoke, for example, but we just barely got out. It went to the ground, and so my dad, at 26 years old, 4 kids, filed for bankruptcy and moved us to Chicago, and that's where I grew up, actually, on the north side, just kind of within hearing distance of Wrigley Field.
Yes.
So I was a Cubby fan when I was a kid. And I grew up as a Roman Catholic. That was the religious environment that we grew up in. And so I went to parochial school for the first 4 years of my life, kindergarten through 4th grade. And after that, then went to public school. And so this was kind of a spiritual backdrop for me. But I'll tell you quite honestly, this was religious activity for our family, like religious involvement is for a whole lot of people. When you're growing up, it's religious activity, and then the real test of the significance of that in someone's life is what happens when you become a teenager and you have to own your own convictions, right? And when that happened for me in the middle of the 60s, when all of those things I just mentioned were happening and the entire culture was in upheaval, that's when I began to think, do I really believe in these things?
Yeah.
And the answer for me was quickly no. And I abandoned it. And ironically, everybody in our family, 5 kids at that point, and my mom and dad, we all went our own directions by the end of the 60s, spiritually speaking. Or I should say, we went in our non-spiritual directions because that's pretty much what ended up happening. Yeah. We abandoned those foundational roots. And
why do you think that played a part? Is this because we get rebellious in our teenage years, or we hear outside influences, or did you not?
No, I think that's part of it for everybody. Rebellion, I don't think, is a necessary part of teenage years. It'd be an interesting conversation why it works out that way a lot of times. And I have a teenager now, and I was a teenager, and so I understand a little bit about how that can happen. But it doesn't happen with everybody. Here's what happens with everybody, Bob. Everybody comes to a point in their life when, because mom and dad says it was true regarding religion, is not a good enough reason to believe it. And so when I get in conversations with people who have other religious convictions, say they come from other countries, particularly Muslims, for example, come to the United States, and they're Muslim now, I'm going to ask them, just out of curiosity, are you a Muslim because you were raised in a Muslim environment and this is your culture, or are you a Muslim because you actually believe that the view of reality that Islam provides is actually true? Okay?
And you can ask that across the board to Christians, everyone.
Anybody, of course. I just use Islam as an example, but it's this is what I'd ask of a Christian who is now a Christian and believes what their parents did, and I want to ask them, is it because you were raised that way, or are you convinced that it's actually true?
So when you went to, what were you going to church regularly with your family? Was
when you're raised Roman Catholic, there's a certain threat. If you understand Roman Catholicism, if you don't go to church every day you're supposed to, really bad spiritual things can happen to you.
And apparently they did for a little while.
Well, I'm just saying, it's the Roman Catholic theology. And so we did go to church on a regular basis because of that threat. I mean, to be quite honest with you, it isn't because we wanted to be there. It's because our religion required it under threat of damnation. I mean, just to put it in straightforward terms, it was a mortal sin not to go to church on Sunday and other holy.
So whatever they were teaching you, those times that you went, weren't enough to make it stick for some reason.
Well, there was nothing that seemed substantial to me. I was just raised in it, and that's what my religion, that's what my family believes, and so I had the idea that I just described regarding myself. That is, I believe this because that's what my family believes, and this is the kind of home we grow up in. When you become an adult, that's when you have to decide where your convictions actually lie. And for a lot of people that have been raised in somewhat nominal religious homes, and I mean nominal, not in the sense that it wasn't important to them, but they were not given good reasons to think it's true. When they start thinking for themselves and other options look more attractive.
A lot more seductive. I was about to even say in the 60s, you're in there and you're getting all this crap over here, and then you're looking at all this, like, I'll like to that, please. Well, because there's nothing substantial over here other than whatever.
Well, the seduction is a lot more appealing now than it was 40 years ago or 50 years ago now, in my case. So, but you're right. That's it. We're looking at different options. And look, when you're 18 years old, you're not thinking about being pure and holy and righteous. And those aren't the things that flood your mind.
Very few. Not me. I wasn't there.
So, if you don't have a good grounding, that is, if you're not convinced that what you believe is actually true, then there's very little incentive to stick with it when other things are more attractive. And that's exactly what happened to me. After I left the church, I said, well, I don't really believe that. I embraced a very amorphous kind of spirituality. I wasn't really an atheist, but I wasn't anything else either. There was something going on, but it didn't matter. I wanted to do my own thing. Okay, this is when relativism was just beginning to get a foothold in the culture. Now, of course, it's common fare. Everybody has their own morality. There is no big morality, no objective morality. Which is certainly not God's Christian morality governing us. Forget about that.
I see a lot of the people, it's not even so much, I mean, there's some of that, the truth side, is it real, is it, which we'll talk about when we get to Story of Reality. But I feel or I sense the people that I talk to or I see that I read, there's just a complete disenchantment with Christ.
Yeah.
It's not like, I'm an atheist and I hate him. It's more, no one's really telling people who Jesus really is, how brilliant he is, how smart he was, how wonderful we've been disenchanted. We just talk about hell, heaven, get it right. And I mean, Jesus was incredible. And I think we've lost sight of him.
There's a mixed bag on this one, I think, because in secular circles, Jesus still has kind of high Q. He's still popular. But that's because people don't take him seriously. What they see him as is a social justice warrior. That's the current way he's been cast lately. And of course, social justice, at least the particular and peculiar way that's characterized nowadays, is a cause celeb, and everybody's involved with that, and whatever. And it has a lot of political ramifications. Sure. It's not just about justice.
Right. Well, you don't need a word before justice.
I don't know who it was that first turned me on to this idea, but whenever you put a adjective before the word justice, you corrupt it.
Right. That's true.
But see, this is a Jesus made in the image of local social justice warriors, and if they would just go back and read the Jesus of the primary source historical accounts, principally Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, you're not going to get the Jesus that people think is really cool.
Not at all.
You're going to get another guy that, by today's standards, was pretty intolerant and pretty narrow moralistically and theologically. But, as you pointed out, really smart.
Yeah, brilliant.
I have a friend who is a Parisian atheist. He now lives in the States, and he's a Christian, but he told me about his own conversion. And part of that included wanting to disprove Christianity because he had a Christian girl he was interested in, and he wanted to disabuse her.
God has used girls more than anyone to get people to do it.
Right. He's used girls. He's actually sex is probably the most appropriate thing. It was that desire and so he's going to try to show her this is a bunch of nonsense. So he thought, well, the first thing I should do is I should read the Gospels. I should kind of dispatch with that nonsense. When he started reading the Gospels, he said two things occurred to him immediately. One of them, he realized he wasn't reading mythology. He was reading history. Okay, that was the first thing.
That's incredible.
The second thing that occurred to him is that Jesus is really smart. He had great insight. He stood up against the toughest minds of his culture, and he could never be bested by those people.
Though they tried and tried. And he asked great questions, and he went after the disenfranchised, where he went off after talked about women and the free. It's he was a warrior, and he still is, but I mean.
And it's interesting, even when he starts talking about the disenfranchised, what he's doing in those cases is he is not really introducing anything new.
Right.
He's taking the message of the Old Testament prophets and the Mosaic Law and the dignity that afforded to everyone, and he is now communicating that in the context of a different culture. And of course, the aristocracy, the theological aristocracy of the time wasn't having any of it. And that made him really mad. But the principal debate there, in my view, here was not, in a certain sense, the establishment versus the marginalized, because there were a lot of marginalized that didn't want anything to do with Jesus, and there were establishment types that did. Nicodemus, Joseph of Arimathea come to mind. The real dividing line wasn't that. The real dividing line was those who acknowledged their need for him, what Jesus called the poor in spirit there on the Sermon on the Mount, and those who thought they were righteous enough in themselves to gain God's favor.
Which is still the big question.
It's still the big question.
I'm a good enough person. I'll be fine.
Exactly. This is exactly
It's the two people, the tax collector and the guy that beat his chest. You're like, I'm so glad I'm not this guy. And you're like, wait a second. The right response is, I beat my chest and going,
this is a message that the social justice crowd is not interested in. They want Jesus, the champion of the marginalized, not Jesus, the champion of the repentant sinner, beating his breast, saying, God, have mercy on me. Okay. And so this is where the ways part. And you see, these were things that I had no real conception of growing up. And then I embraced all these worldly options. And I thought I was too smart to be a Christian. I'd raised up a bunch of objections to Christianity that Christians that down in Daytona Beach during spring break at university couldn't answer for me, etc. So I just blew the whole thing off.
So how bad? How bad did it get in the '60s? I mean, you abandoned whatever little thing that you may have had. Were you like you were a teenager in the '60s? Were you normally a basically decent guy?
I wasn't a bad guy. I was a basic hippie, just like everybody else. I had long hair. I was against the war in Vietnam. You know, I smoked dope. I drank a bit. I wasn't a big drinker. Like some were, in the college scene, but, premarital sex, it's fine, no big deal. I was morally a relativist.
Okay.
That is kind of, don't judge me, we don't judge anybody else. Except I was against the war in Vietnam.
Yeah, so you're making judgments.
Exactly right.
You're making moral judgments.
Bub, when I thought about that a little bit, even at the time, it occurred to me that I was living a bit of a contradiction there. On the one hand, for myself, morality, that's just make me up. Everybody figures out their own thing. On the other hand, I was saying the war in Vietnam was an immoral war.
Really wrong. It was wrong. So you knew there was good, there was bad, because
we have the same thing now with people, but I don't think most of them are thinking about that. For me, I was aware of the contradiction. But I'll tell you what happened. I said to myself, essentially, doesn't matter, because I get the payoff. I can get to at least proclaim that I could live the way I want to live.
It's all about you.
And that's what mattered to me then. It was narcissistic. It was selfish. Just like today.
Absolutely.
Things haven't changed. It's amazing, having lived through the '60s, how much today is like the '60s.
And now it's everywhere and in your hands, and it's ubiquitous.
That's right.
You used to have to go find it, and now it finds you, and you're just right there.
I was reading in Hosea, as it turned out. I'm reading through Scripture, and there in Hosea,
hard book.
It says, "You sow to the wind, and you reap the whirlwind." And the '60s, we were sowing to the wind, and now, 45 years later, we are reaping the results of that which we've sowed and continued to sow. So where it all changed for me, Bub, is when I came to California in 1972, and I was chasing a woman.
See, there you go again.
That's right. That's right. Now, I didn't get the gal. She was my high school sweetheart. We were at Michigan State University together. We came out here. She came out first. I came out to follow her. But that was the end of that relationship. But that's where the Lord got a hold of me. And it turned out that my younger brother, Mark, had become a Christian a couple of years before. Now, Mark was kind of the jock of the family, and so we were all in sports, all the boys, but Mark was the most accomplished one. And so I thought, since I was the only one to go to university of our own family, I'm the only one who had a degree. I thought, I'm too smart for that kind of stuff. That's good for Mark, good for you. You found something you like, kind of attitude. But I'll tell you something about Mark. Mark is really determined. And so when we were here in Southern California together, he kept talking to me about Jesus, and the Jesus he talked to me about was not the same Jesus.
Of course not.
Now, in one sense, it was theologically the same Jesus that I've been raised with, but what Mark communicated to me was something I had not heard before, and that was the grace of God. That Jesus actually came to rescue us, and when we put our trust in him, we get rescued.
Amazing.
So that I could have the confidence that I was going to heaven, not because of anything that I did, but because, like that tax collector you mentioned, beating my breast, saying, God, have mercy on me, a sinner, I would go away justified, just like Jesus said of that one. And if I would put my trust in God's rescuer, Jesus the Messiah. And I did that. Actually, it was 46 years, 2 weeks, and about 5 days ago.
Wow. Well, so
I just had my spiritual birthday, and so I'm
you
kind
know
of
the
aware
moment.
of it.
See, I'm one of those people. I can't tell you the moment. It was a gradual thing, and then I'm like, well, I absolutely trust this completely, and I've been living it. But I can't tell you I was at a Harvest Crusade or a Billy Graham.
Look, it doesn't matter if you remember when you were born.
I love it.
As long as you were born. As long as you're alive.
Because I don't remember when I was physically born either, but I know that. So it's like, but I love it when people actually have the time. And so did Mark. Mark was pivotal in that. Is he a pastor?
He is.
He is. That's right.
Yeah, he's been a pastor like 35
For a
years.
long time,
he's ready to hang up his cleats, I think. But yeah, he was pivotal in that. He was the one who had the biggest impact on me. Now, here's something ironic. What I do for a living is combat the idea that I had before I was a Christian that I was too smart to be a Christian.
Right.
I thought Christians were just for dummies who required someone else to do their thinking for them, like the pastor. But now I found that the smart money is on Jesus.
Right.
Now, a lot of guys in my profession, so to speak, who do what I do, which is to offer reasons, lines of thinking, rationale, evidences why Christianity taken as a whole is the best explanation for the way things are. A lot of those guys, they became Christians through reasons like that.
Right.
Okay. So they tried to disprove Christianity. J. Warner Wallace, for example.
Yeah. Lee Strobel.
Cold case detective. Lee Strobel, journalist. Okay. Both those guys hostile to Christianity, atheists, and started to take their tools and apply it to Christianity and had a complete change of mind because of what they discovered.
Right.
And then they leveraged that into a way of communicating that to others, writing books and stuff like that.
I think it's amazing how God, gifts you early on, and through the course of just growing up, you start to use the very gifts to find out.
Sure.
And now you're about that, and you want to be
in a
about
lot
that.
of cases, that's exactly what happened. It was different in my case, though, because I did not become a Christian through apologetics.
Right.
Even though this is really what my life is all about.
But you wanted intellectual.
What
because you
happened?
thought your brother was.
I know.
Ridiculous. So there was something in your head.
And I thought Christians were stupid or ugly, or something like that. I had all these ideas, but this is the irony.
Yeah.
As Mark began to share with me and talk to me about the truth, all I can say is it began to sink in.
Yeah.
It sounded more and more, not just appealing, but it sounded more and more accurate. It sounded more and more true. It just
the
began
scales
to
were just coming off.
make sense to me.
Yeah.
That's the way I look at it right now. And so it wasn't like, I had this argument or that argument, or now I know God exists, or there's the historical evidence for Jesus, and all right, well, now you really got me thinking. That wasn't it at all. I came to Christ the way a lot of people do come to Christ, and that is through the power of the gospel working on their hearts.
Yep.
And by the way, this is the way everyone ends up coming to Christ, but sometimes it's the means of apologetics. That wasn't the case with me.
Sure.
And so in 1973, September 28th, when I trusted Christ that Friday evening in my apartment there in West LA with Mark sitting at the table, I didn't have all these reasons and rationale. The very next day, I ended up having an encounter with my best friend, my doubles partner at the time, and a couple of people at a barbecue there when I stood up for Christ there.
The next day.
The very next day. I wasn't even 24 hours old as a Christian. It's what God did. And I was just trying to hold my own against this barrage of challenges, people really angry at me. Soon after that, I realized I better start getting some answers to these questions. And that's when I began migrating towards apologetics, having a reason for the hope that's within me. I had one reason, and that was the confidence that the Holy Spirit had given me about the truth of the gospel. And I think that's a legitimate reason. But there's a difference between knowing and showing. Okay?
Amen.
I knew, but I couldn't show other people what I knew. I needed another means to do that.
So what in the world led from so how do you go from there to starting Stand to Reason?
Yeah.
I mean, that's 30 years old? How long?
I was actually 43 years old when I started Stand to Reason. That was 20 years after I became a Christian. I'll tell you what happened. And there's a lesson in this because what people don't realize who are Christians is that God can use even small acts of faithfulness to absolutely set a new trajectory in other people's lives. The summer before I became a Christian, I'm riding a bus down Santa Monica Boulevard, having been body surfing there at Santa Monica Beach, all wet and bedraggled, long hair, still a hippie, and all of that kind of stuff. Young lady sitting in the front seat, in front of me in the bus, reading the Bible. Her name was Adrienne Thatcher.
Wow.
She introduced herself. I said hi, and I'm trying to, get some action here with her.
Yeah.
All she wants to do is tell me about Jesus.
Yeah.
Now, when I got off the bus with her, I walked her to her apartment, and I never saw her again in my life.
Wow.
However, she happened to mention in passing that there was a Bible study in Westwood Village that she was going to on Wednesday nights. And months later, after I became a Christian, I found that study. It was a community of Christians that was living in an old fraternity house. It was called the Jesus Christ Light and Power House.
Okay.
Sounds kind of crazy. Hey, a lot of crazy things in the Jesus movement. But I moved in there a few months later, and I lived there for 2.5 years. And that set the trajectory for my life because I studied the Bible for 2.5 years. I got discipled very tightly. And then after that, I got a degree in the Bible. I went overseas a number of times. I was a staff pastor at a church for about 8 years in the South Bay of Southern California. Got involved in apologetics, and there were a whole bunch of individual things that ended up taking place that really formed my life. I spent 7 months in Thailand working in a refugee camp there, helping Cambodian refugees in 1982. And so there are all these particulars, but notice, how did those things happen? 1976, I spent 5.5 weeks behind the Iron Curtain working with Christians in the former Soviet Union and other Iron Curtain countries. It happened because there was a young lady named Adrienne Thatcher who had no interest in this young hippie trying to pick her up except for to share Christ, and in the process gave some information that later on down the line set a trajectory that led ultimately to Stand to Reason.
And that happens a billion times a day.
Yes, it does.
God is orchestrating and providentially orchestrating these incredible.
I like telling that story because I want people to see the potential that they have, Christians, the potential that they have to make a massive difference in simply being faithful in small things day to day.
Amazing. Every time I see Rocky now and he says, "Yo, Adrian," I'm going to think of this story. So it's going to have an impact even beyond it. And I watch Rocky a lot.
Yeah. So it's a great franchise. I like the whole thing.
Yeah, me too. So how does Stand to Reason start? In what light? I'm going to get on a radio show and I'm going to put some microphones. This is what I'm going to do. What in the world?
Well, it actually never happened that way. Ironically, radio started 3 years before. 3.5 years before. I started radio in 1990.
Okay.
And I'll just tell you, so many things, Bub, happened to me from my perspective completely serendipitously. That is, I had no grand plan.
Okay.
I'll tell you one thing that I did, though, and I offer this a lot to people who ask me about the story and about how they plan their own lives and making a difference for Christ. I said, I had a conviction, and that is whatever it is that I had, that I was capable of doing in any given time, I tried to do that faithfully. Okay. I call it bloom where you're planted.
Yes.
So when I started getting interested in apologetics, I'd want a couple of people to Christ. So I'm going to sit down on the floor with them in the living room, and I'm going to tell them what I just learned. Right. Teach the Bible a little bit, give them some answers to their questions. I didn't know much, but I knew more than they did. And as I continued that habit over time, my understanding of these things that I was talking about grew, and my opportunities grew. Yep. They were varied, but every time something new came up, I would spend some time focusing in on that. Okay, I'll do that. So in 1990, somebody asked me, they're testing for a radio talk show host on the weekend. Would you like to do a radio show? I'd never done radio before. I knew nothing about it,
crazy.
And this was really in the very early days of talk radio.
Yeah.
This was 40 years ago.
Crazy.
30 years ago. Okay, 1990 was when I started. So we're almost 30 years now. This is my 30th year in radio. So I said, sure, why not? Because I was willing to take a chance, step out, push the envelope a little bit, if I had an opportunity to make a difference for Christ.
What was the show about? I mean, was it someone just said do a radio show? You said sure.
It was a Christian station.
Oh, it was, okay.
It started out as like a news talk format, which you're familiar with. It's every hour you talk about some newsy item that pertains to your audience, okay? So in our case, it was a Christian audience, so we tried to rip and read news, and try
comment
to
on the current events,
encourage people to call. But after a couple of years of doing that, I just did not like that. I wasn't into all of the politics so much. I care about that stuff. I care about the difference that the culture makes on Christianity and Christianity on the culture. But this just wasn't my lane, so to speak, as J. Warner Wallace had put it. And then one day they asked me to come in to fill in for somebody else. And they said, you could do whatever you want, but we just need your body in front of the microphone. Okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to start with a commentary, something on my mind.
Yep.
And then I'm going to open the lines. People can call in and ask whatever question they want, and I'll do my best.
Which is gutsy back then. I mean, is this your personality? Have you always just been whatever? Let's talk about anything, ask questions.
I don't
crazy.
actually know. I just, here's what I thought, Bub. I thought this would be fun for me.
Okay. Yeah.
And if I don't know the answer, I don't know the answer. But maybe I do.
Right.
And I'll tell you, in the early days, I would listen really intently to the caller and listening, thinking, "Oh, okay, there's something. There's a thing I could say about that," and then I jump in and offer whatever I could. This is bloom where you're planted.
Absolutely.
And over time, my understanding expanded. I was forced to be more careful about my ideas.
Yep.
I had to think through them more carefully because now I'm talking on the air about them.
Yep.
I had to take more responsibility for my own theology. I had to justify it better. All of these were part of the growing process in those early years. And by the time 3.5 years into that radio part of my career, I started Stand to Reason with some other folk.
Yep.
I had some helpers that helped, in particular, one person, Melinda Penner. I had developed a little bit of a kind of a following in Southern California, which is not a bad place to start radio.
Yeah, absolutely.
Second largest market in the country. And therefore, that is something that gave me a little bit momentum to get involved in an organization. Right. So think about it. I didn't plan to be in radio.
No.
It just happened, okay? But doing that one thing developed my capabilities in a certain way. I'm doing interviews. I'm meeting people like J.P. Moreland or I'm trying to remember who was around back then, but people who are significant players in that field, Norm Geisler, Josh McDowell, And as I'm building these relationships and learning and developing my own craft, now I have an opportunity to start an organization.
Yeah.
So I never started anything from a standstill.
It just kind of just rolled in and happened.
It's just something that kept going. But it wasn't because I planned it all out.
Yeah.
What was I planning to do? I was trying to be faithful.
Yeah.
At that particular time, even when I was in radio, late 80s, early 90s, I was a staff pastor at a local church in the South Bay, Hermosa Beach, Hope Chapel in Hermosa Beach. So what did I do there? Well, I was a teacher and I ran a Christian ed program and I did writing for them.
Right.
So now I'm developing my capabilities. Here, do this. Write these things. Okay. And all of these things were baby steps, but became stronger and stronger as I did them. And I took the craft seriously.
Yes, you did.
And then as you're faithful in little things, then God gives you more. And that's kind of what led up to the idea that let's start an organization where I can focus on the things that I do best, which is, broadly put, communication to Christians in American culture. Yeah. My heartbeat wasn't evangelism, Bub. I mean, I do evangelize, obviously, but my heartbeat was really discipleship.
Right.
My heartbeat was to train Christians to think more carefully about their convictions and to engage others and defend classical Christianity, classical Christian values in a hostile environment. How do we learn how to navigate that?
Which is part of because I think, let's go ahead and just switch into tactics. I mean, because this book is, it's like I carry with my Bible. If you have 3 or 4 books you always go back to, that's the one that's always ratted and tatted. It's on my.
You're going to pull a copy out of your back
It's on my iPad. It's because I think I would say every apologist that I've heard, a lot of evangelists that I've heard on the radio refer to this book a lot.
Yeah.
And they ask the same, the questions, how'd you come to that conclusion? What do you mean by that? These are they help so much because it takes all the pressure off. Why did you write this?
I'm so glad to hear that. Sometimes people say, how long did it take you to write Tactics? I said, about 30 years.
Yeah, I'm sure. It took forever.
In a certain sense.
What made, because this is it's really who you are. And you've, in a way, you've mastered it. I listen to your podcast every week. And especially when the callers call in, it's my favorite part. And you just are so winsome and so kind. And that's half the battle, isn't it? To just not lose your cool and go, hey,
that is a huge part of it. Yeah, you're right. So let me explain just for the viewers here that what we mean by tactics. Tactics are the ability to maneuver in conversations in an effective way. So when you think of warfare, for example, you got strategy, that's the big picture. But tactics are the like the hand-to-hand combat, I guess. It's just what happens when you hit the beach, okay? Now, the warfare metaphor has some application, but we have to be careful because even though there's a spiritual battle, our engagements, in my view, with people who don't share our convictions should seem more like diplomacy than D-Day.
That's a good way to say it.
So I noticed that as even myself, but many others, as we were engaging the culture with our ideas, I noticed, first of all, that there was a shallowness to the way many Christians dealt with things. Not a lot of good thinking, a lot of slogans, but not a lot of careful thought, which is ironic because we have such a long history of careful Christian thinkers.
Many good thinkers,
you know. The history of philosophy is chock full with them. Almost everybody up until the 19th century or 18th century were committed Christians that were in the history of philosophy.
Brilliant people.
But somehow in the beginning of the 19th century, we'd gotten away from that kind of thing. So there was a shallowness, but there was also a shrillness. What I wanted to restore was thoughtfulness and this winsome and attractive manner. Now, the irony is that wasn't my style.
Yeah, I was curious about it because you got a little angst to you. It's not the right word, but there's a commanding spirit in you.
There's a little intensity there, and so I can be a little bit of a loose cannon. Actually, it was much worse when I was a new Christian, and this is why it was good for me to be discipled, because my discipler really loved me a lot and really helped bring me to heel, so to speak.
Who was
on
that?
A number of things. His name was Greg Koukl, and he's a pastor in Maui in Kihei, a Hope Chapel there.
Thank you, sir.
30-some years.
Thank you for helping this guy.
Craig's he's the best. Good. All right. But for 2.5 years, he was a dad to me, and he really helped me. So I wanted to try to be a dad to others, even at a distance. And as I was trying to do better with my own engagement style and in my own effectiveness, I kind of over time stumbled on these techniques or tools that I began to use in my conversations. Some I got from others. Some were not new; they were old.
Well, you took something right from Columbo, which is the fantastic. I grew up watching that show, and when I read the book and saw that, I'm like, I know where he's going. This is great. It's
Lieutenant
perfect.
Columbo.
Yes.
Now, to be fair, though. Lieutenant Columbo became the icon I used as a foil to explain the tactic, which is asking questions. That technique goes back to Aristotle.
Oh, of course.
It goes back to Socrates.
Of course.
There was Socrates, then Plato, then Aristotle. You got 3 generations really tight there of good thinkers. But the Socratic
But no one had really done it.
Pardon
on a
me?
television show.
Well, what you see in Columbo is you see a great characterization of using questions in a disarming fashion. I mean, let's face it, Columbo, he shows up with his rumpled trench coat.
He's always looking off to the side.
He's got a cigar, in his hand. He doesn't have a pencil. No. He's got to bum a pen or a pencil off of somebody so he can take notes. And he starts asking these questions that this guy doesn't look like he can think his way out of a wet paper bag. He's stupid, but he's stupid like a fox, And as you watch him maneuver with these innocuous sounding questions, he's gathering information, he's building his case. Now that is a fabulous way for anyone, frankly, to maneuver in conversations. And what I tried to do is to capture that in a more intentional and formalized way to establish what I call a game plan, the Columbo tactic, using questions to maneuver in conversations. And you offered a couple of them just a few moments ago. They're right there on the tip of your tongue because you use them so often.
They're always there.
What do you mean by that? And how did you come to that conclusion? And in the book on tactics, and the 10th anniversary edition is coming out November 26th.
Fantastic.
So I'm really excited about that.
And you're doing an audio version too, right? Or
I'm reading right now the audio version on a couple of days. I have my last studio session. I love reading my own material because I know what I mean. And so I can phrase
the right
it
inflections, the right
exactly. So I'm very excited about that.
That's going to be great.
And this new edition, by the way, has 40% new material.
Okay.
It has 6 new chapters. It's got a whole chapter on a brand new tactic. It's got I call it Inside Out.
Yes.
It's got a chapter on mini tactics. That's a lot of little
Yeah.
ones like the power of so.
Yes.
And just what a friend we have in Jesus. That's a mini tactic.
That's great.
So there's a lot of fun stuff.
Sum it up. Yeah, sum it in the book. It's great. But sum it up for our viewers. Like, why would a Christian want to have tactics? Why would they want to read it?
I'll tell you, here's the simplest way to put it. When we are in conversations with people, one of 2 things is going to happen. Either we're going to take over the conversation, and so we're going to be in the driver's seat in a harsh and overly aggressive manner,
Yep.
or the other person's going to be in the driver's seat and driving us around where we don't want to go.
Yeah, especially with these types of topics that you would bring up, right? I mean,
absolutely. There's so much political correctness in just about every aspect of Christianity right now.
Yeah.
So how do you navigate safely? And the tactical approach is meant to put the Christian in the driver's seat in a winsome and attractive way. So you can imagine, or the viewers can imagine, if we were asking the right questions, we're not doing most of the talking.
No.
The other person is doing the talking. If I'm asking a question about their own views, well, what's happening? I'm listening. I'm learning. I'm looking for some kind of opportunity here, but I'm not opposing them yet.
Yes.
I'm not trying to have a fight with them. I'm not trying to tell them they're wrong. I'm trying to, as I say famously, just put a stone in their shoe.
That's another. Okay, so let's have fun a little bit. Let's role play.
All right.
Let's give it a shot. I'll be the antagonist, the guy that you on the bus. And
Since
I'm
you're
like,
so nasty to begin with.
Yeah, I'm a terrible person. Hey, you know, I heard you talking to this person over there about Jesus. That's kind of an arrogant way to look at it. Jesus is not the only way, and everything I hear from Christians is negative. And so why would I believe?
So you've got a lot of things going there, Bub. Let me just start with the first time you said that was just such an arrogant way.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what you're talking about. What do you mean by that?
Oh, well, you just told her, you know, she was asking, I believe in a bunch of different ways to get to God. And you said, no, there's only one. And I'm like, that's pretty,
okay.
Pretty one, seems narrow.
Okay, I got it now. But I'm still confused. What is arrogant about thinking that a person is right about something important?
Okay, I guess it's not.
Spell it out for me. I
guess it's not arrogant.
Because I don't want to be arrogant at all.
Okay.
But I didn't think I was. So I'm just trying to figure that out.
Okay, maybe arrogant's the wrong word. Maybe it seems you're trying to proselytize or tell her something that she doesn't want to believe or something, and just leave her alone.
Okay, was I trying to change her mind? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, maybe.
Okay, you're right. I was trying to change her mind.
Okay.
But let me ask you a question. In this conversation right now, you're bothered in some way by something I've said. Is that right?
Yeah, suppose. Yes.
Okay, so you don't like the way I was talking to her.
The way you talked was pretty nice. It's just kind of what you were saying.
That I was trying to change your mind.
Right.
Okay.
With that specific topic,
so
the religion
thing.
Yeah.
Right now, Bob, are you trying to change my mind?
Yes. See, this is how this works. Our role playing's over. This is the master. This is what I love. I want to do this all day because I learn when I'm doing it. But see, just know it. Read the book.
We can keep going.
I know, and it'd be like your show, and then I can't hear you. Yeah.
Sorry, you're really good at that.
I'm the bad guy?
Yes. No, being the bad guy, it's a natural thing for you.
Appreciate it.
You're really good at being a bad guy.
Great, that's what I want to hear.
Well, let me make a few comments about that because this was, you know, I didn't know what you were going to say. We didn't even talk about the role play, but when people want to role play it, I say, okay, let's take a shot at it. And it almost always starts like this.
Yeah.
There's an accusation against the Christian, all right? And the accusation is usually kind of put in the most harsh way possible. Right. That's arrogant.
Yeah.
Okay, so now I need clarification. I have a pretty good idea. I know where you're going.
Right.
Okay. Right. But I want you to be more precise about your complaint.
Yep.
I'm not asking in a defensive way.
Yep.
I want you to spell out what I'm doing. Because I don't think in the conversations that you may have witnessed or anyone witnesses that I am actually being arrogant.
Yep.
And if I'm being arrogant, then shame on me.
Yep.
But it's a common way to characterize the Christian who thinks that Jesus is the only way.
Right.
So the question then, what I asked you is another form of the very simple opening question, what do you mean by that? So I'm just saying, so what was arrogant about what I was doing? And well, you weren't doing it arrogantly. Oh, okay, good. I hope not. But it's arrogant kind of claim. Okay, so what's arrogant about thinking you're right?
I know. I did that on purpose because it comes to life when you actually see it, right? The questions, and it's not very hard. Questions put everything on the other person, so at least it's clear at the very end what they really mean, and now we can talk about what we're really talking about.
Sure. And let me make an observation too. In that conversation, who was doing most of the talking?
Well, I was.
You were. Okay. Who was guiding the conversation? I was. But not in a nasty way, not in a hard. I was fully and completely in the driver's seat of that conversation. Now, sometimes it doesn't work that smoothly.
Well, you have the steamroller people. You have all these types of people.
If somebody wants to steamroller you and interrupt a lot, well, there's a chapter on that in the book. So we teach people how to deal with that. But when people raise objections against Christians, first thing we want is clarification. Tell me exactly what it is that's bothering you or troubling you about my view. A lot of times, as it turns out here, the challenger is doing the very same thing.
That's when you really flip it, right? Aren't you doing the same? I think Jordan Peterson just did this too. And famously, I think it's what made him really famous on a talk show. And the lady said something, and he turned it right back. Aren't you trying?
Right, and she was like you're doing right now.
She said, I guess you got a point, which changed.
Well, he didn't use a question, so he gets a small demerit for that. But he was definitely on the problem. I think that was the one where he said, "Gotcha."
Yeah, something like that.
He could have avoided the gotcha too.
Well, he's a little different style than us.
Correct.
And, I don't know where he stands.
No, but I have nothing but respect for his ability to maneuver in conversations like that, and he was spot on there. Incidentally, there was another tactic in play in our conversation. And that's the suicide tactic. The suicide tactic is when somebody else's view implodes, basically, but they don't realize it. And in this case, it's what I call practical suicide, and that is somebody is making a complaint against you, and the complaint itself is guilty of the very same thing.
Right.
But notice how I exploited it. I kept asking you questions to get really clear on it, so you couldn't get out, and then I
put me in the corner.
Ask you the final question.
Well,
aren't you?
I think part of this has to do because of your redemption and because of even your perspective. If it wasn't something intelligent that was moving you toward the Lord, you actually got told the grace of Christ from your brother. Right. You were the guy that said, "Have mercy on me." And I think love drives you to write that. Because, this is famous from Ravi Zacharias. He said, behind every question, there's a questioner.
Right.
And you got to love that person. That's why you're winsome and gentle and respectful.
Well,
not because you're trying to win.
I just, to be candid, though, that was a learned skill.
Well, I'm sure. Of course, you're working for it, but
I
you don't want to win.
Concerned about that other person. I definitely am. But as I pointed out, my biggest heart is to help other Christians to be able to do the same thing. So there's a discipleship thing going on inside of me that is a huge part of what I do at Stand to Reason. In fact, the organization Stand to Reason, our entire goal, 18 people on our staff, 3 different speakers, 4 now. Our goal is to train Christians to think more carefully about their convictions and to be able to defend classical Christianity,
you're doing
classical Christian values.
Just a fabulous job. You're doing a fabulous job. Let's switch over to what in the world made you write Story of Reality? And why that title?
It started out with a different title, and I won't even go into the different title, but I had dinner with J. Warner Wallace one night, and I'm in the middle of the book, and he leans across. Remember, he's a cop, right? He said, "Greg, that title you got, that's a dumb title. You can't use that title. Nobody's going to read your book." And in it had been the working title for 10 years, but now in 15 seconds, he persuaded me.
Good old Jim.
So I took the subtitle, The Story of Reality, and made that the main title. And then I took the current subtitle from the first paragraph of the book. So the book's title is The Story of Reality, How the World Began, How It Ends, and everything important that happens in between.
I love it's great.
And the reason that the title is so important is because of the way people approach the issue of religious questions nowadays. they approach religious questions not as a feature of knowledge, but rather of emotion and, I'm putting scare quotes around, faith.
Yeah.
That is, it's kind of your spiritual fantasy, okay?
A fake faith. That's not biblical faith.
No,
Biblical
it's
faith
not
is
at all.
trusting what you
And this
evidence.
is part of the point that I'm trying to demonstrate in the book. And so what I'm trying to show is that we have a story, okay? It starts in the beginning, God, and it ends at the end of history as we know it, okay? And it tells all the important things in human history that happened in between, which is in a certain sense, the salvation story.
Right.
God coming down to rescue human beings from themselves.
Which is a big part of it. I love how you write in the plot, he's a rescuer. And you're actually,
that's right.
That's
well, you could talk about Savior, and that's true, but that's a word that's so used nowadays that it falls on deaf ears to a large degree.
Yeah.
So I talk about God's rescuer, Jesus of Nazareth. So, but one thing that I want people to understand about this story that we tell is it doesn't start with the words "once upon a time,"
Right?
Because it's
not
not
a fairy
meant
tale.
It's not meant to be
it's
understood
history,
as a myth or a fairy tale. It's meant to be understood as things that really happened and people that really existed and events that actually took place. It's history.
Yeah.
It's nonfiction. It's not fiction. That's the way it's meant to be understood. Now, of course, as a Christian, I have to defend that claim.
Right.
But I want people to understand the kind of claim we're actually making.
Right.
And that's why I titled this The Story of Reality. It is a picture of the way things actually are. Christianity is the story of reality.
Yes, it's the best inference of what we see and what we live and what we see. So,
my daughter asked me once, my 14-year-old, she's now 14, but she, when she was about 8, she said, "Papa, why do we believe God is true?" That's the way she put it. And so, I mean, that's now the question of what's the why, deal. And I'm the apologist, so I'm supposed to have these answers, but she's 8. So I'm trying to think about how to answer it. And finally, this phrase came to mind that really captures my whole project in defending the faith, in defending Christianity. And what I said to her is, honey, the reason that we believe that God is true is because he's the best explanation for the way things are. He's the best explanation for the way things are. So this goes to the explanatory power of the Christian story of reality. If we understand how the story works and what it's meant to explain, and then we set this story against reality, there's a tremendous fit.
It lines up better than anything. Yeah,
anything else. There's nothing that comes close.
Yeah.
Certainly not atheism.
No. Well, where do you... I'm going to switch subjects completely. Where do you unplug? How do you unplug? People, I want to know personal things too. Like you're working all the time. You're busy. I mean, you're going to do 9 things after this. You fish.
I do fish once in a while. It's mostly in May and June.
Okay.
In Wisconsin, and I'm fishing for smallmouth bass. Okay.
And then
so we have some property.
And you have a shop too, like a wood shop.
I have a wood shop. Wait, do I have a wood shop?
Do you?
Yeah. Okay. I think I have a wood shop.
Okay. Yeah.
Hey, Greg, do you like our cloud of witnesses there behind you?
Yeah, that's right. There's the cloud of witnesses. Oh, I have a wood shop. All right. Yeah, I like woodworking. Yeah. I like bass fishing. I'll fish in other parts of the country, but we have some property in way north in Wisconsin, almost to the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. But and I like that. That's getting away. You know what? When I think about it, I don't unplug too often.
Okay.
All right. Yeah. But that's because there's a lot of demands on my life. I try to find spaces of relaxation, and in different seasons, like coming up December, things slow down for me. January is a little slow down as I ramp up into the year, and then I can do some more things like around the house or in the shop and that kind of stuff. But I try to find spaces of rest. Right now, we're at a really tight time of year, the fall, and there's a lot of reasons for that. I've been, so far this year, I've been on 4 different continents. I leave for Israel in a few days. This is a little bit more of a relaxing time with my wife and some other colleagues. I'm not teaching, but I'm hanging out with some really good people that I know professionally, as about 20 of us or so. And that's going to be a nice time away. So I get little spaces here. But I'll tell you what, I don't think I could do well just kind of retiring and playing pickleball.
Right.
There's too much important stuff to do.
Amen.
There's just too much happening.
Yeah.
There's too many people who need encouragement, who need equipping, who need to be, in a sense, mentored.
Yes.
To deal with a world that's encroaching all around us.
Yeah.
And I don't want to just hang up my cleats.
Yeah.
I imagine as time goes on, I'm almost 70, I'll slow down a little bit, but there's just too much to do. And the thing is, I'm still young. I was thinking about this here.
You are.
Coming in. And I don't mean I'm still young 70. I'm still young in eternity.
Oh.
This is just such a small part of everything. I've got eternity.
Yes.
Momentary light affliction is producing for us an eternal weight of glory,
Yes.
Paul says.
Yes.
So I'm kind of like at the front end getting some work done so I can rest forever.
Yes.
And if I got to work a little extra on this end, that's all right.
That's fine. Yeah.
I'm still young. I got a lot of time to enjoy it.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, yeah. A lot of time, if you can put it like that. So you touched on this a little bit, but when you started 30 years ago, what is different now the last 5 years than it was the first 25 years you're doing? What is going on with culture?
Right.
That you're seeing?
Gee, I could not have imagined.
No, me either.
Certainly 30 years ago, the place the culture is now.
Mm-hmm.
The level of hostility there is to Christian ideas. Now, it's not always to individual Christians.
Right.
People say, what's it like living in California, man? Those guys are crazy out there, and the politics, oh my gosh. I said, well, I don't run into a lot of trouble where I live or probably anywhere. It isn't like people are pounding on my door or picketing out.
Got to look over your shoulder when you get in the car.
No. The people are pretty nice to me. And even when I go on university campuses, I generally get treated with courtesy by non-Christians, even though they'll push back strongly ideologically with questions on my views. Okay. However, the culture is deeply hostile to Christianity. There are presidential candidates that are saying now, if you're a church that preaches against same-sex marriage, which, by the way, is the law of the land, so preaching against it isn't going to change anything. It's the Supreme Court law of the land. If you preach against it, we are going to remove your tax-exempt status. That is, we're going to remove your individual, we're going to punish your congregation because you don't walk the line that we want you to walk.
We tell you to.
Are you kidding me? This is a presidential candidate right now. So who'd have thunk? Who'd have thunk 15 years ago there'd be a Supreme Court decision, Obergefell, on same-sex marriage? Who'd have thunk that one of the most politically incorrect things you could ever say is that there actually is a him and a her, a he and a she, a male and a female? There are so many things that people are claiming now that are so obviously topsy-turvy and contradictory of reality.
Well, calling good bad and bad good. I mean, we're in this weird phase of like you actually think it's okay to kill your child.
That's right.
Yeah, and you're fine with it, and you want to videotape it, or you want to just I did it, and or
it's so bizarre that it is. There's an obvious spiritual element influencing people to think the opposite of what is. It's not just what is true in some abstract sense. It's opposite of what is real.
What is real and what is really good.
Nowadays, being a female has nothing to do with having a uterus or having ovaries and having an ability to bear children, et cetera, et cetera. Has nothing to do with that. What does it mean to be female now then? That's so bizarre.
Yeah, it's hard.
And so you got that bizarreness, you got that hostility, and something else that I never thought I'd see. You have massive numbers of Christians who continue to call themselves Christians who are going over to the other side. Yeah. It's characteristically called progressive Christianity.
Yes.
They are gay affirming. Yeah. They are pro-choice. They are religiously pluralistic. Yeah. And by that I mean
universalists.
I believe in Jesus, but you don't have to believe in Jesus. Whatever.
That is just not. I mean, that's like saying I'm a baseball player and I've never played and I never get up and swing a bat. No, you can't just say it.
I don't know why there are so. Well, I do know why, but it's still stunning to me.
Yeah.
These are things that for which there is no ambiguity in Scripture. None of these things are ambiguous.
Well, there's the
Scripture.
attack. It's attack specifically on the words of Scripture and then moving them as far as you can out of it.
But
well, even the debate inside where, supposed Christians on one side and others on the other side, and they're talking about abortion, and a Christian speaker thinker is for abortion and trying to make his point, and
not only that,
it's not
there
even
was a
clear.
debate recently with a pastor who is an abortionist who was aborting for Jesus. Mike Adams,
That's right.
he
Mike
debated
Adams
against
debated
him. And I don't know who the guy's name is, but he was saying, I'm aborting for, this is the will of God for me to be an abortionist. So this is how wild it's gotten. It's not just out there, the ideas, which means that we have to be a lot more up to speed, doing our homework as individual followers of Christ in order to address those ideas out there. But even inside the confines of the church writ large, you have a lot of people that care more about what their friends think about them than what Jesus thinks about them.
Oh, that's dangerous.
That's what it comes down to. Now,
is he your Lord and Savior? Is he your rescuer? Have you put your trust in him? And if you love him, you keep his commandments.
That's right. So how could somebody say that they're a follower of Jesus and then actively pursue and promote all of these things
he's against
that are completely against what Jesus stood for? Whether he spoke about them or not is not the issue. A high Christology says all of the words of the Bible are Jesus' words, because he's God.
He's God. He wrote
so how is it that this happens? Now, I'll give you an insight. I mean, it's an observation I've made, but it comes from Mark 15:15. And I think the same thing is going on here as went on there. There you have Jesus before Pilate. And Pilate has to make a decision. Barabbas or Jesus? Who does he release? And here's what the text says. It says, Mark 15:15, wishing to please the crowd. He released Barabbas. And he sent Jesus off to be scourged and crucified. I think that's what we're facing here, even with people who identify as Christians. They want to please the crowd more than they want to please Jesus. And so that means Stand to Reason's job. It's really, we have a big job ahead of us.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, like to end the show with we call the one thing.
The one thing.
It's called the one thing. You're going to look at that camera and you have one thing to tell people in 1 minute.
Okay.
And it's the thing that is on your heart, the dearest. Look right there and go, here it is.
Given that my chief concern is for followers of Christ, because they're the ones who make the biggest difference in the world, what I want to hear when I pass over is I want to hear the words, well done, good and faithful servant. And if I want to hear those words for me, I want you to hear those words for you. And there's only one way that we're going to hear those words from our rescuer, our Savior, and that's if we finish the course, if we keep the faith, if we stay true to the truth, the faith once and forever delivered to the saints. Do that, and you'll hear those words. Do that, no matter what it costs you, and you will have an impact in the world that will last for eternity. Those are my words.
Wow. The wonderful Greg Koukl. Thanks for watching the Bub and Bob Show. We'll see you next week. Adios.